So what you're asking me here is about the application of the DORA law, which I don't know, right? So I'm not a lawyer, and it isn't a law or a standard in which I am familiar. So if the law applies to the HQ, to the head office, it will depend on, I think, the legal structure of the organization. It will depend on how that organization is structured, to whether or not, this is normally how it works, to whether or not the other entities are covered by that law and that legal requirement, even though they're outside of the jurisdiction. So it could be the case that the law applies to the HQ. The legal structure is that the organization outside of the geography is a legal entity, and therefore the law applies to that legal entity, right? So what your client is going to need is some legal advice, right? Somebody who understands the legal nuances of DORA, and who understands the specific circumstances of your client. If I were to approach it, my standard approach would be implement 27001 in the whole organization as a standard. So in the last tutorial, I went through how 27001 fits as a framework. So the 27001 framework is a governance, risk, and compliance framework. It's a very basic, very forgiving framework, and it's about how we structure the management of information security. So having that baseline across the organization, for me, would absolutely make sense. What we're saying is that the entity outside of the geography has a law that applies to it that says that it has to implement that, right? So that makes common sense. Now, I think I would speak to a lawyer for that jurisdiction as well, because it is unusual for a law to dictate the implementation of a specific ISO standard. I have never seen that. So I would want to see that. What the law will normally say is that you have a requirement to implement a information security management system, because that's generic. And they would give you an example, e.g. ISO 27001. So it is unusual. I would like to see the name of the law stated so I can research it, that the law says you have to implement 27001. And whether or not the law says you have to certify or just implement. So to recap, normally laws and regulations say implement a security framework aligned with, and then they give the example of 27001. So for me, your client, implement 27001 in HQ, makes sense. Implement 27001 outside of jurisdiction, makes sense. Then layer on the requirements of the law to each of those entities, dependent on what the legal team say. So if DORA is required, that's fine. We can layer DORA on top of 27001 at HQ, and there may be other laws that apply outside of that jurisdiction.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay. Not sure if I helped or not, right? I'm not sure, but it's difficult to comment on specifics when you're not involved with that client. So as you would understand, when we consult, it's almost a joke that when people ask you a question, the answer is always, it depends, because there are so many variables that will influence the answer that you would give. So for me, it's, you know, I'm just trying to give you as a generic answer as I can based on the knowledge that I've been given.